She screamed like she'd been hit by a tsunami of hot lava, except it was fluorescent orange landscaping dye blasting from my sabotage hose, soaking her from head to orthopedic sandal. Her sun hat flew off, her voice cracked into banshee territory, and by the third spin of that sprinkler, she looked like a radioactive pumpkin throwing a tantrum. And the best part? She did it to herself. You don't steal water from a structural engineer and expect mercy, especially not when your name is Karen. I've woken up to some weird sights before: a possum in the trash can, a flamingo lawn ornament mysteriously transplanted to my flower bed, but nothing topped the morning I stepped out with my coffee and saw my entire lawn looking like it had survived a tropical monsoon. The grass squished under my slippers. My mailbox was practically floating. I stood there blinking like an idiot, trying to process if I'd sleepwalked into a swamp. What made it weirder was the hose, coiled neatly like it had been tucked in by a bedtime story, and it was warm. Not just warm, used warm, which was interesting since I live alone, have no sprinkler system, and certainly hadn't taken up nocturnal gardening. I'm Logan Pierce, bachelor, structural engineer, water bill minimalist. My hobbies include not paying for utilities I didn't use and avoiding unnecessary human interaction. So you can imagine my horror when I opened last month's water bill and saw a number large enough to suggest I was running car wash out of my garage. I double-checked the address. Nope, still me. Just me. And my shrilling tomato plant that looked like it hadn't drunk a drop since the Obama administration. At first, I thought I'd gone insane. Maybe I left the hose on. Maybe the meter was wrong. Maybe squirrels had evolved opposable thumbs and a need for cleanliness. But none of that explained the warm hose, or the puddles that only appeared on the left side of my yard, or the fact that the hose was oddly stretched toward the street, as if it had been borrowed repeatedly. That's when I started watching and listening and noticing things like how the ground was always wet on weekend mornings, but never on weekdays. Like how my neighbor across the street, Karen, had installed a brand new pressure washer, but somehow never connected it to her own spigot. And if you're wondering, yes, her name was actually Karen, and no, she wasn't the HOA president. She was worse, a self-appointed guardian of the cul-de-sac clip. She gave out violations like Halloween candy. Wrong shutter color? Strike 1. Trash bins out 12 minutes early? Strike 2. Your wind chimes can be heard from the sidewalk. You're basically a domestic terrorist. The first time I saw her march down the sidewalk in her sun hat, floral blouse, and that infernal clipboard tucked under her arm like a word of God, I thought maybe she was just enthusiastic, the way one might be about bird watching or antique Tupperware. But as the days passed and the complaints stacked up for other people, thankfully, I realized she wasn't just nosy. She was weaponized nosy. A one-woman HOA SWAT unit. It wasn't on her radar yet. But my hose, it definitely was. And as I'd soon find out, when Karen wants something she doesn't ask, she just takes. It happened on a Saturday, the kind of morning that should be reserved for pancakes and pretending emails don't exist. I pulled into my driveway with a grocery bag dangling from one hand and a cinnamon roll in the other and froze. There she was, Karen, in broad daylight, dragging my hose across the yard like she was in a shampoo commercial. Her sun hat flopped lazily in the breeze, and her massive pressure washer was already humming like an angry hornet. She smiled and waved at me like this was a block party and not, felony trespassing. "Hope you don't mind," she chirped, already spraying down her front steps like she was competing on suburban clean sweep. I stood there completely dumbfounded, cinnamon roll halfway to my mouth. She didn't even blink, didn't pause, just turned her back and kept cleaning, humming along to some invisible elevator music only she could hear. I watched for a full minute, mentally calculating how many gallons that pressure washer must be guzzling per minute, and all of them from my wallet. Then, because I'm what some people call Midwestern polite, even though I'm not from the Midwest, I walked over later and gently knocked on her door. She opened it, still in her cleaning gloves, beaming like we were long-lost cousins. "Hey, Logan, something wrong?" I asked very calmly if she was having plumbing issues and needed help. She laughed like I just asked if her fridge was running and said, "Oh no, your hose just has better pressure. And anyway, isn't this all community property?" She said it like she was quoting scripture, like suburban homes came with a shared water clause in the HOA covenant. I blinked, said it wasn't, and that I'd prefer she not use my spigot. Without asking, she just gave me that condescending head tilt that says, "Ah, you think you have boundaries," and said, "I'm sure the HOA won't mind. Sharing is neighborly," then closed the door in my face. I didn't scream, didn't yank the hose back. I went inside, sat on the couch, and stared at the faucet like it had betrayed me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she didn't know better. Maybe I hadn't been clear enough. So I did what any sane adult would do. I emailed the HOA, included some photos, the water bill, a short explanation, and asked very politely if this counted as misuse of property. A few days later, they responded with what can only be described as the HOA version of a shrug. "Thank you for your concern. At this time, we encourage all neighbors to resolve minor disputes amicably." Translation, deal with it yourself, peasant. Fine, message received. So I did the logical thing. I bought a lock for the hose. Simple fix. Karen couldn't use what she could access. Problem solved. Except the next morning, I stepped out with my coffee and saw the lock lining on the ground, not unlocked, sliced clean in half. Someone had used bolt cutters on a hose lock. That's like setting off fireworks to open a bag of chips. I just stood there, staring at it like it was a crime scene, half expecting a chalk outline in a forensic team. And there, right on cue, across the street, Karen, sleeves rolled up, hose in hand, casually washing her SUV like nothing had happened. Water everywhere, my water, spraying in elegant arcs, while she smiled and hummed like she was in a shampoo ad again. I stormed over, not yelling, not losing it, just asking, "What happened to the lock?" She said, "Oh, that thing, it was a tripping hazard. I took care of it." Then smiled and went back to scrubbing her headlights. I walked back to my house in stunned silence, gripping my coffee like it might launch a counterattack. That's when I knew. This wasn't ignorance. It wasn't an accident. It was a declaration of war. And if the HOA wasn't going to help, then maybe it was time I got creative. You don't bring bolt cutters to a hose fight unless you're ready for round two. And trust me, round two was coming. She just didn't know what she was about to start. The next logical step wasn't confrontation, it was surveillance. If I couldn't stop Karen from turning my hose into her personal utility line, I could at least document the theft like a seasoned PI. So I installed a discreet motion sticker camera right above the spigot, tucked under the eaves, camouflaged inside a fake birdhouse I bought off Etsy. Cute enough to pass HOA standards, functional enough to catch a garden criminal in 1080p. I checked the angle twice, ran a test with my dog, and waited. 2 days later, boom, caught in the act. There she was at 10:32 a.m. in her usual uniform of yoga pants, sun hat, and moral bankruptcy, dragging the hose across the yard like it came with her mortgage. And not only did she steal the water, oh no, she put on a whole Karen production. She watered her flower beds, filled up a kiddie pool, then gave her Labradoodle a full shampoo and rinse. Had 12 minutes of footage. Crystal clear, wide shot, full Karen mode. If she had done one more thing, I would have needed a director's credit. Naturally, I did what any rational, petty, coffee-fueled homeowner would do. I posted it to the local neighborhood Facebook group. Caption, "Neighbor steals water daily, guess who?" It didn't take long for the comments to explode. Some were horrified, some offered legal advice. One guy tagged his cousin, who's apparently a lawyer, and someone else just wrote, "God, I knew it was her." But the best part, Karen saw it. I knew she did because the next morning she showed up at my front door. No sun hat, no porch smile, just fury, like I'd keyed her Lexus instead of just, exposing her daylight water heist. She accused me of violating her privacy, harassing her, threatening her reputation, all while standing on my porch, dripping with entitled rage. I stayed calm. I reminded her she was the one who trespassed, the one who cut a lock, the one who filled up her dog's kiddie pool with someone else's water. She crossed her arms and hissed the phrase that sealed her fate. "Do something about it. I dare you." Now listen, I'm not a spiteful man by default, but there's something about a Karen issuing a challenge on your own property that awakens the inner engineer. You want to play, fine, but you don't get to pick the game. She dared me to do something, and the next words out of her mouth should have been, "Oh no, what have I done?" Because when you mess with a man who knows plumbing, pressure valves, and physics, you don't get wrecked. And that's when the gears in my head started turning. I had plans, I had blueprints, I had access to a construction site. It started with a random drive past the new housing development a few blocks over. A crew was working on an empty lot, and in the middle of it sat the holy grail of revenge, a massive industrial sewage tank. Not the kind you see on RVs. This was the real deal. Temporary waste containment for porta potties, full of all the things Karen's flower bed didn't deserve. I slowed down, pulled over, and through the power of small talk and a $50 0 cents Home Depot gift card, I got access for one night. Strictly for irrigation testing, I said. The foreman didn't even blink. God bless underpaid contractors. Back home, I went full mad scientist. I built a dual outlet splitter rig for my spigot. One path to normal water, one path to the special supply. I laid out a secondary hose beneath a layer of mulch and ran it to the back of my property where I could switch the flow from inside my garage using a hidden valve. It was elegant, it was discreet, it was borderline diabolical, but it was also completely legal. I even tested it once with gloves, a hazmat mask, and an old bucket. The smell alone could violate the Geneva Convention. It worked perfectly. The next morning, the bait was laid, the original hose unguarded, the sun shining, and right on schedule. 10:34 a.m. and Karen appeared. Like clockwork. She strutted across my yard without hesitation, grabbed the hose, and attached it to one of those spinning lawn sprinklers that look like torture devices for grass. She turned the spigot. At first, nothing. Then a low gurgle. A confused pause. Then it hit. A jet of brown, putrid sludge burst forth, arcing high and wide like a grotesque fountain from hell. The sprinkler spun once, twice, then unleashed a full 360D of sewage fury across her pristine white porch, her plastic flamingos, and her entire front yard oasis. Karen screamed, not a yelp, not a shriek, a full-blown banshee wail that echoed down the street. She slipped, tried to shut the valve, only to catch a second blast square to the shins. It was art. Live, smelly, karmic art. By the third rotation, the neighbors were outside. Someone dropped a mug. Someone else pulled out a phone. Karen, covered in what can only be described as industrial karma, wrestled the hose like it was a venomous snake. And the best part, every second was captured in glorious HD. The footage was perfect. The chaos, the fall, the screaming. It was better than I'd imagined. And I didn't say a word. Stood inside, sipping coffee, watching on my monitor like it was the season finale of a show I wrote myself. But I knew it wasn't the end. Karen didn't get humiliated quietly. No, this was just the first act. By that evening, Karen had gone full nuclear. I found a thick envelope taped, to my front door, probably to make sure it didn't blow away in the wind. Inside was a 3-page rant, typed in Comic Sans, because of course it was, accusing me of biochemical terrorism, emotional sabotage, and my personal favorite, weaponized gardening equipment. She threatened legal action, HOA action, even spiritual consequences. I'm not making that up. There was a Bible quote in bold at the end, like I had just committed original sin with a garden hose, but what really caught my attention was her closing line. You have 48 hours to issue a formal apology and pay for professional detoxification, or I will escalate this to the highest authorities. I didn't know if she meant the police, the HOA, or God himself. Naturally, I responded like any rational adult. I printed out a photo of her soaked in sewage from the camera footage, added a speech bubble that said whoops, and stuck it on my fridge. But I knew she wasn't done. Sure enough, the next day, the HOA president himself showed up. Dale, a man with the personality of a beige wall and the fashion sense of an expired jar of mayonnaise. He stood on my porch holding a clipboard like it was a badge of honor, flanked by Karen, who had changed out of her ruined Lululemons and into a power suit that screamed, "I Google how to look intimidating" last night. Dale cleared his throat, said they'd received a formal complaint and were here to mediate a serious neighborly dispute. Karen interrupted him 5 times before he could finish. She called me deranged, obsessive, and then bizarrely, a basement warlord. I don't even have a basement. But Dale, to his credit, did ask to see any relevant footage or evidence. I smiled, invited them inside, and brought up my full archive on the living room TV. Footage of Karen dragging my hose, using it multiple times, cutting through my lock, and finally, her glorious sewage sprinkler baptism. Karen's face went from smug to sour faster than you can say trespassing violation. Dale sat there blinking like a malfunctioning robot. Karen tried to say the videos were deep fakes, which made me snort laugh out loud. Then she pivoted to saying I had stolen the sewage. From where? I asked. A secret backyard reservoir? Her eyes narrowed into slits. I handed Dale a printout of the HOA bylaws, specifically Section 4.2b about unauthorized use of utilities, highlighted, annotated with timestamps. Dale looked at it, looked at her, then muttered something about needing to review this at the next board meeting. As they left, Karen turned and hissed, "This isn't over." I smiled and replied, "No, I'm sure the next chapter will be even more entertaining." She didn't respond, but she did slam her car door hard enough to trigger a neighbor's car alarm. And that's when I realized something. She wasn't fighting for water anymore. She was fighting for control. And losing control was something Karen Wilkins didn't know how to do quietly. 3 days later, a certified letter from the city showed up like a love note from bureaucracy itself, except this one came with the sweet kiss of a $600 0 cents fine. Violation of residential sanitation standards, it read, as if I had turned my front yard into a biohazard zone instead of just serving poetic justice. I sat on my porch rereading the letter while sipping coffee like it was the latest plot twist in a legal thriller. Karen, of course, had escalated. She'd reported me to the city health department, conveniently omitting the part where she repeatedly trespassed, stole utilities, and publicly dared me to do something about it. Apparently, her version involved phrases like toxic, wasted warfare and emotional destabilization tactics. I almost admired her creativity. Almost. So I did what any logic-loving, camera-owning, suburban tactician would do. I pulled out the full unedited footage, timestamps and all, and made a new folder titled Karen v. Reality. I included screenshots, HOA correspondence, water bills, and even the specs of my temporary hose valve system, just in case anyone decided to accuse me of installing some villainous sprinkler superweapon. Then I sent it to the city with a polite email titled False Complaint by Repeat Offender. A few hours later, I got a response from a city inspector named Deshaun. He'd looked through everything and requested to visit in person. Deshaun showed up the next morning, clipboard in hand, safety vest on, but with a smirk that said he'd already watched the video and enjoyed it way more than he should have. He inspected the hose setup, laughed when I showed him the fake birdhouse camera, and nearly choked on his own gum when he saw Karen's sprinkler show in 4K. "Look, man," he said, "I've been to some nasty yards. Yours ain't one of them. If anything, I should be fining her for water theft." He wrote a formal clearance, said no action would be taken against me, and left with a pat on the back and a half joke, "If you ever need a reference, I'm your guy." But that wasn't the real victory. The real fireworks started when I shared the video again, this time edited with timestamps, a little slow motion, and just enough dramatic music to qualify as neighborhood cinema. It spread like a California wildfire in a drought year. People didn't just watch, they rallied. Comments poured in from folks who'd been steamrolled by Karen in the past. The guy who got fined for a patriotic mailbox, the teen whose wind chime got confiscated, the mom whose chalk art was deemed graffiti. My inbox became a confessional booth for the HOO oppressed. And then came Glenn, the hammock guy from 2 doors down. He showed up on my porch holding a box of homemade cookies and said, "It's time." I raised an eyebrow. He opened the box, revealing not cookies, but printed petitions signed by over 30 residents calling for an HOA emergency vote to review Karen's tenure, her abuse of power, and her water crimes. I don't know what amazed me more, the fact that he had mobilized half the block or that the cookies were real and also delicious. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just my battle anymore. Karen had lit too many fires, and now she was standing in a neighborhood full of matches. And just when you thought the storm had passed, Karen made her boldest move yet. That same night, at exactly 9:14 p.m., she filed an official motion with the HOA board, demanding my removal from the neighborhood under the clause of creating a hostile healing environment. The very next morning, I found a notice on my mailbox. You are under review for community disruption. For a moment, I just stood there and laughed, not because it was funny, but because I already knew how this was going to end. And she had no idea the storm she'd just walked into. The special HOA hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday night, which felt oddly appropriate, smack in the middle of the week like a passive-aggressive sandwich between suffering and surviving. I walked in holding a manila folder so thick it probably had its own zip code. The clubhouse was packed. People brought folding chairs, snacks, and that unmistakable energy you only get when suburbia's favorite villain is finally being taken to court in yoga pants. Karen arrived late, of course, flanked by two board members she had clearly manipulated into thinking she was queen of Sunnyside. Her lips were pursed so tight she looked like she was permanently sucking a lemon. The moment she saw me, she did a double take, like she'd expected me to slink in quietly and beg for mercy. Bad news, Karen. As the board called the meeting to order, Karen jumped up before they even finished the agenda. I demand immediate action, she snapped. This man has terrorized me with sewage, surveillance, and slander. He weaponized a hose. A hose. She actually said that last part like it was a war crime. A few chuckles rippled through the room, which only made her madder. He's humiliated me in public, online, and I have witnesses who will testify that he created an atmosphere of intimidation and psychological warfare, she added dramatically, gesturing like she was auditioning for daytime television. That was my cue. I stood up, calm as a bomb. If I may, I said, handing each board member a copy of my folder. Everything is documented. Video footage of her trespassing multiple times, stealing water, damaging property, cutting locks, my water bills, emails to the board, my attempts to resolve it peacefully, and of course, the infamous sprinkler footage. I paused. All captured on my property using legal surveillance and not once edited or manipulated. One board member raised an eyebrow, the other flipped through the packet like it was the latest thriller from Grisham. Karen stood frozen, her jaw twitching like it was glitching. Then Glenn stood up. He didn't say much, just walked to the front, placed a petition signed by over 40 neighbors on the table and said, "We're tired of being bullied. This isn't about a hose. It's about boundaries. And for years, she hasn't respected a single one." One by one, others followed. The bird feeder couple, the mailbox lady, even the teenager who got cited for sidewalk chalk. Each gave a quiet nod, a story, or a piece of paper. By the time the sixth person stood, Karen's fake smile had fully melted into a visible twitch of panic. And then the twist hit harder than a pressure washer to the face. One board member, clearly annoyed, opened Karen's own violation history, which someone had anonymously leaked. Turns out she had 15 unresolved complaints filed against her by other neighbors, all misplaced in processing. I raised an eyebrow. I guess the filing cabinet was full? The room laughed. Not a loud laugh, but that dangerous, unanimous, justice-as-come and chuckle, the kind that smells like retribution and HOA bylaws. Karen tried to speak again, but the board cut her off. "Miss Karen," said the chairman, "we'll now review the evidence in executive session. You'll be informed of the board's decision within 48 hours. She slammed her palm on the table. "I demand a public vote," she shouted. "I will not be silenced by fake news and host propaganda." But no one listened anymore, not even her favorite board lackeys. One of them quietly stood and excused himself like he just remembered his casserole was burning at home. As the meeting adjourned, Karen stormed out like a villain in Act 2, arms flailing, muttering something about lawsuits and internet mobs. I stayed behind, chatting with neighbors, some of whom I didn't even know by name, but who now smiled at me like we'd just won a war together. And in a way, we had. But I also knew one thing. This wasn't the final battle. No, Karen wasn't done yet. People like her never go out quietly. And something in her eyes tonight told me she had one last card to play. And it wouldn't be pretty. 2 days later, I got the envelope, cream-colored, embossed, and so dramatically sealed with a sticker that it looked like it came from Buckingham Palace. Inside was the HOA's final decision, stamped and signed. Karen was officially sanctioned. She was fined, $1,200, 0 cents for repeated violations, including trespassing, destruction of property, and misuse of utility. But the cherry on top, she was temporarily suspended from all HOA decision-making privileges. For a woman who used to strut around with a clipboard like it was a scepter, this was exile, neighborhood exile. I didn't gloat much. Okay, I baked the cake, but only because I had leftover frosting, and it felt poetic to decorate it with "Rest in Peace, Hose Tyranny." I even shared it with Glenn and the bird feeder lady. Community building, you know? But just when I thought the saga had finally gone full Shakespearean tragedy, Karen made her final move. And it was gloriously dumb. At 2 a.m., my security cams picked up a shadowy figure creeping into my yard. There she was, wearing all black like a discount ninja, dragging what looked like her own garden hose. She crouched by my spigot, fumbling like a raccoon on Adderall, clearly trying to reconnect to my line. Only this time, I was ready. The moment she twisted the nozzle, the hose hissed, and then splat, a geyser of fluorescent orange dye exploded all over her. Yeah, I swapped the tank. No more sewage. This time it was industrial landscape and dye. Non-toxic, biodegradable, but it stained skin for 72 hours. And her face? Neon tangerine, glowing under the motion lights like a radioactive pumpkin. She screamed. I mean screeched. Tried wiping it, only to smear it worse. And of course, the camera caught everything in glorious 4K. The best part, she panicked and ran straight into a decorative flamingo she'd stolen from another neighbor last year. Down she went, into a bed of mulch. Next morning, the footage was everywhere. No captions necessary, just Karen goes full carrot and a timestamp. It hit Reddit, then Nextdoor, then somehow a gardening meme page. People laughed, memed, even remixed her scream into a dubstep track. And as for Karen, she vanished, disappeared like a bad Wi-Fi signal, house dark, curtains drawn. By the end of the week, a for sale by owner sign showed up. Subtle, classic Karen. But the final twist, the day after she moved out, I got a postcard, no return address, just a handwritten note. You may have won this cul-de-sac, but this war isn't over. K. I laughed out loud in the middle of my front yard, holding a coffee mug that read "Justice Flows." Because here's the thing, she was right. It wasn't just about hoses or bylaws. It was about respect, boundaries, and consequences. And for once, a neighborhood fought back and won. Now my mornings are quiet. The hose stays untouched. The lawn's peaceful. People wave. Kids ride scooters without being scolded for existing. And my tomato plant? Thriving. As for me, I kept the footage, kept the rig just in case, and I started a little blog, HOA Hellscapes. Stories, tips, the occasional revenge idea, purely hypothetical, of course. Because when the next Karen arrives, someone out there will need to know how to fight back, preferably with pressure. Turns out, all it takes to shut down a Karen is one good idea, a camera, and a lot of petty determination. I didn't plan to be the local hero. I just wanted my water bill to stop looking like I filled a pool for Beyoncé's backup dancers. But hey, sometimes standing up for yourself starts with a hose and ends with a whole community waking up. So yeah, if you've got your own HOA horror story, drop it in the comments. I want to hear it. Smash that like button harder than Karen slammed her sprinkler shut. And hit subscribe if you believe revenge is best served pressurized. Until next time, protect your spigots, trust your instincts, and remember, in this neighborhood, karma flows at 45 psi.